more I'm willing to sort of step out there and share things that I've been ashamed of, things that make me uncomfortable, the stuff that makes me ordinary, like a non-superhuman, idealized, whatever the hell I wanted to be, but just like a real person. The more other people are willing to do that too, and the stronger my relationships get, the better performance we get out of our organization. In creating that exemplar that you described, I think one of my mentors used to say, leaders go first. And I think that's the opportunity here, is to go first and watch the ripples.
Ryan, what's up, man?
How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to be having this conversation with you. I feel like we have been circling each other with lots of similar experiences, ideas, passions for people like Michael Singer who are creating great work in the world. And I thought maybe we could open up this conversation with a text message that you sent, which in a group that we're both in, that I found is very profound. You said, the scope of our lives is a product of our relationship with shame. When and how did that revelation come into your experience?
We're just diving in deep.
We're just, none of this, like, tell me your story.
Yeah, none of that.
Where'd you grow up? Like, I want to get into the meat, man.
I love it. So I have done a few things in my life that at one point or another I was ashamed of. More than a few things. I've done many, many things that at one point I was ashamed of, but a few like pretty significant things. And I think the first time that I was confronted with the impact of that shame was when and in a real tangible way, started to work with that differently, was the first time that I raised venture capital. So in my late teens, early 20s, I went through a phase where I did every drug that I could find and drank all sorts of stuff, and just, almost died a couple times, almost killed somebody drink driving. Like, was a kind of a mess in that period of time. And I ended up spending a little bit of time in jail after getting my second DUI in that period of time. And 4 years after that, I was raising venture capital. I got sober, like a year of drying out time, and then, kind of reinvented myself as a hotshot tech CEO, which is what I thought was the coolest thing that you could be at that point. And, went through the process of building MVPs, went through an accelerator early on, ate PB&J and ramen for a period of time. And then at some point, paid your dues, right? You know about that.
Exactly. It's a rite of passage, man.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then at some point it was time to raise our seed round, and a lot of effort before then. But when I finally got an investor on the hook and ready to write a check, during the diligence process, they were like, so yeah, here's this and this and this and this, and then a routine 5-year background check, and then this and this and this and this. And I just this sinking sensation in my whole body as I think about the 4 years distance I am from all of that stuff and what's going to come up during this 5-year background check. And to that point, my relationship with that part of my life, it was effectively excommunicated from my daily life. I didn't talk about it with anybody. Certainly didn't bring it into the work context. It was unwelcome. I had a sense, I don't know that I would have had the consciousness at the time to articulate it like this, but I had the sense that it would change people's perception of me in ways that were incompatible with the goals that I had for myself in my career. But I was actually really fortunate at that time that I didn't have a choice. It's coming up. And it's coming up in this person who is, it is the most vital that he likes me and believes in me, and he's going to find out. And that was terrifying. But at that moment, I figured I had no other choice. So I was like, okay, you're going to find something. And what you're going to find is all the stuff, you're going to find that I got a couple DUIs. I was in jail and this and that. And just here's what's going on. And here's what happened to me. And I kind of
So
came clean.
you told him before the background check.
When he said there was going to be a background check, I was like, I don't want to do this, but I figure it's better to tell him than have him find out and then have the conversation that way. Very self-preservation oriented in that case. But when I told him, I was like, okay, I have, this and this and this and this. This is what you're going to find. And I still remember the conversation. He was very quiet, and he's like, thank you for telling me. Is it still an issue? And I was like, no, I haven't had a drink in 4 years. Or any other substance in 4 years. So now it's not an issue. And he's like, okay. And that was the end of it. And there was this, it took me a while to sort of recognize, I think, that was a shift, that meant that I could deal with this part of my life differently. But that was the first time. And that sort of like gave me the, a little bit of confidence to talk about it more readily with other people. And there was another moment where I spoke about it on stage for the first time, and told like 100 people that I knew that I was in that space. And again, super terrifying. But then I had some people afterwards come up to me, and one guy's like, I just wanted to let you know, I just want to say hi and thank you from a fellow traveler. And it's just a really interesting sort of like connection and relationship that was developed after that. So the way that I've learned to orient to shame is like, there are these things. Sometimes they have to do with our past. In my case, that was where it started. Sometimes they have to do with our future, like things that we want, that we're ashamed to want, that we don't think that we're good enough to have. And we hold them inside ourselves, be out of this desire to fit in, which is where shame originally, that's what it was for. It was to help us to collaborate with one another in the African savannas. And in order for us to have the life that we want, my experience, particularly if you're on the consciousness journey and on the pursuit of any sort of relationship with your true self, you're going to, your success there is a function of how thoroughly you are yourself and all of your quirkiness, and all of your, your unique perspective on the world. And shame is what stands in the way of that. Shame is what keeps us alike, keeps us in line with everybody else, and keeps us from standing out. So, I mean, these days, first time I meet somebody, I often talk about my past with drinking and drugs, and it's never had like, nobody's ever disowned me for it. Nobody's ever, it's always, if anything, led to some really interesting conversations, either with people who have their own past, or kind of takes what might have been like a 2 out of 10 conversation and brings it down to like a 7 out of 10 in terms of the depth at which we're talking. And I think it's a big part of the relationships that I've built since then.
Isn't it funny how we build up these stories about all of the bad things that are going to happen when we come clean about what's true and real for us? And it never seems to be, the implications never seem to be nearly as, destructive as we make them out to be. And in fact, it's usually quite the opposite, which it sounds like it's your experience.
Yeah, I think that we know what result we're going to get when we, do the things that we've always done, right? And if we're used to keeping something inside us, whether that's a thing that we've done or a thing that we're interested in doing, accomplishment we'd like to have, or a person we'd like to become, when we keep that to ourselves, we know exactly what the result's going to be. We'll stay in the same spot and continue to have sort of a arm's length relationship with this thing that maybe someday will be the case, or maybe someday we'll feel okay about. And what happens when we talk about it is we sort of open up the possibility of something different. And we don't know what that something different is going to be. It might be, we can tell ourselves stories about all the nasty stuff that might happen. All the, in my case, I often think about like the people who are going to judge me and, not want to talk to me anymore. And there's a lot of sort of social repercussions that I'm often scared of. But it also opens the door toward a depth of relationship that otherwise is impossible. So if we're always connecting at the level of our personas and the level of, sort of the washed and clean version of what we think, their best presentation is, it might be good for dating, right? But it's definitely not good for any sort of meaningful relationship, if that's what you're up to in the world.
How have you been effectively able to access this shame? And I ask this question because in my own consciousness journey, much of the shame that I've been carrying has been outside of my awareness until a certain point of experience when life brought me the situation, the circumstances needed to see that. And so, yeah, I feel like there's probably a lot of people here that were like me at one point, didn't think I had any shame, but I had like a whole big ass bag of it I was lugging around. So be curious, what that looks like in your experience.
Yeah, I think that's a really good and useful observation. In my work with founders, like if we talk about topics like shame, or we talk about any sort of maybe not any, but a lot of the more challenging topics like that, 9 times out of 10, there's no issue. Like I don't have any issues with attachment. I don't have any issues with shame. I don't have any of these things. They're very much below our awareness. And I think that's a function of our relationship with them being one of they're not welcome. And so we're very good at, disregarding them and disassociating from them and basically just carving our awareness in such a gerrymandered way that we don't notice them. Right. So we can walk around being unconsciously steered by our shame, only having conversations around these 25 topics and definitely avoiding topics of drugs, or definitely avoiding topics of dads or whatever it is, but not even realizing that that's what we're doing, just kind of thinking that that's normal. In my first instance, I think I was really fortunate in that life sort of forced it on me. I didn't have there's no way out in that situation from confronting this thing that I hadn't talked about. But in my experience in the consciousness journey, what often happens is, life will hand you the first version of a realization. But then it's like pulling on the string in a sweater. It's like, oh, actually, if this is one, maybe there's more. And I found that like, as I pay attention to the way that I show up in mostly interpersonal situations, I'm able to see like the times when I tense up, or the times when I realize, most of the time after the fact, that I have steered a conversation in a particular way. I've presented myself in a particular way that's, it gets me the result that I want, but not necessarily the result that's true, or the result that is the most, revealing. And in those cases, I found it really useful to ask why, and just notice like, oh, right, in this particular case, I avoided that topic. One perfect example, my last job, well, I guess it's a couple jobs ago now, but my last startup, the one that I raised money for, and I was there for about 10 years. And then at the end of that saga, I got fired by the CEO that I hired. And that was a crazy saga, all sorts of stuff. I had my Jerry Maguire moment where I go into the office and I'm like, I'm taking the fish, and
Who's coming with me?
exactly. Yeah. Except for my version of the fish was a Happy Gilmore check that I had won from a pitch competition. So I mean that's a thing that happened to me. And over the last few years, as I began to talk really liberally and really openly about my own journey, I noticed that when I would talk to people and I'd introduce myself, and somebody would ask that question about your story, I would always mention the history with drinking or drugs, and I talk about the my relationship with my company and how and my identity and how all that stuff was intertwined and the lessons that I learned from that. And I would always conveniently leave out the fact that I got fired at the end.
Mm,
And if somebody, would ask, I would say, if somebody would be like, well, how did it end? Then like, I would say that, or in a second conversation if it felt useful, but it wasn't something that I led with in the same way.
mm,
Um, Not conscious, but I just noticed that I'm so intentional about sharing topics that offer the conversations that I have the opportunity to deepen. And here's one, and I'm not doing it.
mm,
And once I noticed that, it was an opportunity to question that and to start to experiment with, okay, well, there's a feeling that shows up when I think about like a somatic in my body feeling that shows up when I think about saying that to somebody, and a story that runs in my head about how much they're going to judge me. And that's a pretty good clue that like there's something inside that unconsciously up until that point had been steering me away from going down that road. Um, and then I think the trick is, at least the only trick I've found, is to go down that road, and just do it in sort of bigger and bigger scales until you've metabolized the shame in a way that makes it sort of integrated into your sense of identity.
yeah, I think you did a masterful job at characterizing this dynamic of we have these kind of patterns or response strategies that we don't know that we're running that effectively are designed to help us avoid pain. And these are kind of the quiet, invisible masters of our lives. And until we actually have the depth of awareness to see what's going on. And I'm with you. I haven't found a better technology than just simply noticing when I'm kind of disturbed or like doing things that are like incongruous. It really is this dance of just trying to observe how you move through life.
I think I've had a newfound appreciation for. So I've been a regular meditator for about 15 years, and I've probably logged, I don't know, close to 3,000 hours at this point, on the cushion. And up until recently, it was really easy to um, forget what life was like prior to that, and forget what my mind
Mm,
was like prior to that. Um, Sometimes I'll see people talking about, like, this is what a before and after of you do enough work, you do enough meditation or psychedelics or whatever, and there's life is like, or your mind is like this, and now it's like this. And for me, it's immensely difficult, damn near impossible to remember what a mind feels like that is very busy. Um, and I'm sure intellectually that was the case, but it feels really distant now. So I have an appreciation that, yes, I think that the best that I've found too is to pay attention, and to pay attention, to not just the thoughts that are running through your head, but the sensations in your body and the tightnesses and the various times when constriction happens. But I think that is a capacity that you develop through exercise, through practice, whether that's meditation, whether that's any of the other modalities. I think breath work played a big role in my journey. Psychedelics played a role. Um, and I think it's a thing that it's not it's almost as if it's an innate human capacity that we forget thoroughly, and we have to relearn it. And it takes work to relearn it. And I think that's worth acknowledging too.
yeah, I think it's a really great point. It's one of the challenging things about the inner work relative to going to the gym, right? It's like you can measure how much you lift and what the scale says, and you have this clear like before and after. And a lot of times these changes in the inner experience are so gradual, so refined over long periods of time that it becomes quite difficult to measure just the changes in our being. But there is an immense compounding effect, and the kind of introspective ability that you're describing, where it's like you almost learn to default to feeling into your body. For me at least, and I would love to hear your perspective, it wasn't like I like made the decision like, oh, I'm gonna from this day on I'm gonna feel into my body. It was more like you practice and you practice and you practice, and then one day you just kind of wake up and realize, wait a second, like I'm always thinking about what's happening in my body. You kind of just like realize you're like, wait a second, I'm somewhere different. And you didn't even, you kind of forgot how you got there.
Yeah. I think that resonates in the same way that like it's a challenge to remember that there was a time in my life where I couldn't feel any of these sensations in my body, but it's really hard for me to connect with that time. I know it intellectually from stories, but um, so I was like probably many men in America part of team sports when I was growing up, and I played football and basketball, and we have a relationship with our bodies that's pretty unique in the world of competitive team sports, which is sort of this, mind over body. If your body's sending you a signal, well, smash it down because we don't have time for that. You got to get back on the field.
Right.
So
Shake it off.
there's a
Throw some
very,
dirt on it, like all that.
rubbed. Yeah, that's ridiculous. And also true. So there's this very antagonistic relationship that we have with our body. And um, I I embodied that for most of my young life, probably until about 30 years old or so, where my relationship with my body was it was a tool that I wanted to use to accomplish the minds of the ends of my mind. And if my body ever had something to say, then it was irritant and in the way, and it needs to shut the hell up so that I can get my whatever it is done that I'm trying to get done. Um, and coming from that place, which I think is actually really common for, especially for men in our current culture, coming from that place, it should not have been a surprise when I found myself at 27, 28, when I had my first son. I'm sitting in the delivery room, and he's born, and I remember having this thought in my head that like this is the most intense experience that I'm ever going to have. One of the top ones. It's got to be. And I feel like I should be feeling more than this, but I just kind of am mentally curious as to why it's not more, why it doesn't feel more intense, why it doesn't feel more alive in this very special moment. And that was really disorienting to me at the time. And it kind of got me, it's one of the most profound things that got me to really dive into my own consciousness journey was realizing that the very peaks of life I wasn't feeling. I wasn't there for them. And then you start to pull that thread again. And, I think there's some breath work involved. There was a really nice, really astute coach that pointed out that I was always clenching my abs that I had never realized that I was doing.
Same.
And just all these little entry points that have unlocked different parts of my consciousness. And now it's, as you said, it's like the soundtrack to a movie. I can't imagine not having the soundtrack on and watching the same movie.
So it sounded like you were living in a very kind of like body as a source of performance for your kind of mental pursuits or things you thought were going to make you happy. What do you view the role of the body now?
I don't think I've ever been asked that. I think the body is a way of knowing that is, I think there's some science that talks about the amount of neurons that are clustered in various parts of your body. And there's obviously a ton in your head, but there's also a ton around your heart and a ton around your stomach. And so we literally think, and it's all connected along the vagus nerve. But we literally think with our body just as much as we do with our mind. One of the coolest charts that I've showed people, and there's actually some graphic images of this online too. Is just if you Google what a nervous system looks like, and you get a sense of like all of the parts of that, it goes throughout your entire body. We think throughout all of the different parts. Um, and most of my life, that subjectively was very much not the case. I would conceptualize things, I would abstract things. I was fairly intelligent, so that was a thing that I felt like I could lean on and would lead to good performance. Um, but it's pretty limited. You don't get any sort of sense of the context within which you're thinking. And I think as I've sort of talked my way now into what I think is probably the way that I would talk about the role of the body in thinking is, or in knowing, is all of our cognition takes place inside of our emotions, inside of our physical sensations. And our emotions and physical sensations inform what we're thinking. If we're angry, we're going to think very different thoughts than if we're peaceful or if we're sad or if we're joyful. And without access to that, there's no way of knowing, there's no way of, you're missing some really important key data around the types of thoughts that are, steering how you're showing up in the world. So even if you are entirely controlled at a head level, which I was for a long time, that doesn't mean, just because that's what's conscious, that doesn't mean that your emotions aren't steering all of the stuff that's showing up in your awareness as well, or your body sensations as well.
Such an amazing point that like we, until we go on the consciousness journey, we don't realize we have like a perceptual layer that is creating the mental experience.
Right.
And that perceptual layer is informed by all of those unresolved emotions.
Mm-hmm.
The body does seem to be a gateway to those. And I would be curious to get, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the one other part, I think it works the other way too, in my experience, which is to say that your body can contextualize cognitive, awareness and how you think in the world, but it can also, you can shift the way that you think in the world by shifting your body. And so one of the things that I found immensely useful, a set of tools that I never realized I had until the last, number of years, is if I intentionally relax those stomach muscles, my awareness downshifts. If I have my legs crossed or uncrossed, it's a very different experience of being around people. So like there's this, we read people's body language, and that we look at that as a lens. I mean, if we're paying attention, we look at that as a lens into what their internal experience is like. And it can be that, but also if once you've developed this sort of mind body connection, by shifting your body intentionally, you can change the way that you're experiencing each individual moment, which I think is also a really useful way of working with this.
That's an excellent point, and kind of leads me to something that I've seen you write about, which is this concept of draining prior to engaging in some type of experience where you'd like to be performant. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I think I work with a lot of masters in their craft, CEOs of various stages of startups, every one of whom takes performance in their vocation really seriously. I also have been involved in sports. Basketball has been a huge part of my life. Writing and various parts of music. I'm starting to get into the piano and stuff like this too. But in all of these cases, there's a way of approaching work as a learner, we'll say, which is very mentally involved. If I'm trying to learn a new move on the basketball court, like I'm thinking about it as I do this. If I'm trying to execute, or install OKRs into my company for the first time, I'm looking at the model and I'm very conscious of like, it's got to fit this piece, this has got to go here. And like, as you said, there's a perceptual layer that is quite thick that I've put on top of my perception, with whatever it is that I'm trying to learn. It's not natural now. It's something that I'm practicing, like practicing the scales on your piano, right? And when you're learning a thing and when you're practicing a thing, that's a really normal part of the experience, and that's a part of learning, is trying on a perceptual layer like that, and working within it. But at the peak of any type of an endeavor, at the peak performance level, whether it's music or sports or business, the perceptual layers necessarily fall away. You won't hit your peak if you are managing, in addition to the moment, various layers and models and agendas that you also want to, you're trying to steer within. So what I see over and over in the people that I work with is a process, and when we teach this too, a process of during practice, you're very aware of the different things that you're trying to install in your mind. But when it's time to perform, there's a conscious effort to let go of all agendas, to let go of all expectations, of all desires for this to go in this particular way. Or like, we're going on a podcast. One of the things that I did just beforehand was let go of all the things that I wanted this podcast to be, and all the different things that I hoped, it would turn into, or feared that it wouldn't turn into. And that's like anything else, that's a learned skill of letting go of these perceptual layers and kind of settling into the present moment. And that's where what happens from a sort of a physiological level, or a perceptual level is a better word, is when you're paying attention to these various layers, your awareness contracts to pay close attention to those, and you're much more left brain focused, sort of a predator brain. And when you let go of all of these layers, your awareness expands, and you start to notice much more of what's going on in whatever environment you're in. And that allows you to, because you see these things, it allows you to interact with them, and it allows you to just notice that one note that might fit here perfectly, that if you're paying super close attention to doing it correctly, you'd never notice. And that those interesting notes that just kind of hit your awareness, or the opportunity. There's this one person sitting in the corner that feels like maybe they might have something to say, and I'm not sure why I think that, but like, they have a look, and calling them in. It's those things that make a difference between executing a process right and really conducting something genius.
That's well said. I think of it similarly. I think a lot of times people have this difficulty of understanding how having an expanded awareness can result in more performance. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not very like a very straightforward thing based on what we are taught in society. And I think one thing that's been really helpful for me is this notion of like a circle expanding, where the more the circle expands, the more I can see things more clearly, and the more solutions, opportunities, ways to have win-win-wins are available from that wider lens of perspective.
Yeah. Is there a process or a mental move that you found yourself doing regularly to expand that awareness?
I think it really just comes back to a lot of the things that you said, which is really noticing if I'm contracted.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm a big fan of our natural state is actually that expanded awareness. And it's actually quite unnatural for us to be contracted, even though that's been a learned behavior over our lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way to kind of get back to that original essence is to just notice when you're not that, when to open up the heart, notice when it's closed, like that
Mm-hmm.
kind of um, ideology. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think like a lot of the body stuff you mentioned is great. Like I love the conscious, like draining. It's something I've done a little bit less of, but for me, it more takes the form of like, oh, can you like, I noticed that I'm ruminating.
Mm-hmm.
Like I noticed that I'm a little bit like mentally disturbed by like the rapidity of thoughts. And it's like, oh, okay, wait. Can you just accept that and just open to it? And that kind of thing has been
Mm.
quite helpful for me.
Mm. I think there's a there's a layer to you sort of tied this really neatly together with the idea of paying attention to when you're dodging something or paying attention to when something feels present in your awareness that's not in reality, but it's kind of in that layer stage. Whether that be a contraction in your gut or wherever it is, or whatever it feels like, or a topic that you're sort of steering around. I think there's another layer to this also in the world of leadership. I spend a good deal of time there, and you were a CEO for a while too, and so you're probably familiar with what I have come to think of as organizational transference, which is where the organization takes on the personality of the leader. You ever have
Yeah.
that moment where like all of a sudden you're like, shit, this thing that is pissing me off that everybody's doing, that's actually me. That's why this is happening. It's because of the way that I am.
Uh, More times than I would like. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I want to hear that story, but in a nutshell, like this work of noticing when we get clenchy and noticing when we get contracted and opening into that is those same spots where we get contracted are the areas where we're impacting our team and causing them in a ripple effect to do things that may or may not be in the best interests of us or our organizations. I have story upon story of that, but I'd love to hear one of your examples of when you realize that, oh shit, this thing is actually me.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is when I was managing our sales team.
Mm-hmm.
I would be on
That's a
these
big one,
calls.
man. Sales teams, come on.
It's, I mean, it is like the most fertile training ground for
Yeah.
awareness. I just remember being on calls and kind of like this mentality of like when I was when I was originally coaching people as like, don't fuck up, like, oh, like you did this wrong. You did this wrong. You did this wrong. Like it was kind of like I was micromanaging, and I was frustrated that my team wasn't showing up to those calls with more of an openness and more of like a curiosity and all of the things that I think makes for an effective sales conversation. And what I realized was like, well, I'm not showing up as a leader and a coach with curiosity.
Mm.
I'm kind of like a heat seeking missile to find fuck ups. And um, it was a direct mirror to how I was behaving, that was being transferred, as you put eloquently, to the behaviors of my team. And so I had to, make an adjustment there and learn to be more open and curious.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I'm imagining also that in that point, your relationship with yourself was also something similar to like, don't fuck up, don't fuck up, don't fuck up.
Big time, big time. It was
Yeah.
like, and I think this is like a big part of the surrender stuff, which is like when you're running a startup, like it feels like the stakes are so high, right? And that perceived threat, the strategy is the control, is the clenching. It's like how we are conditioned to respond to those scenarios. And it was a big unlearning to figure out how to move effectively in the world and as a leader from a place that was more open.
Yeah. There's, and in the same way, this again goes both ways, right? There's, realizing that, oh no, this thing that is happening in my organization, this cultural drama or whatever, I'm creating that. that occurs as like this big oh no, and maybe even some dread or shame that shows up with that. But it also is an immense opportunity because there's this lever that we have, by shifting the way that we show up in the world, by doing this work, by letting go of, or healing in whatever way shows up for that particular part, that part that really is sort of the drill sergeant, don't fuck up, don't fuck up. That enables us to show up in those conversations differently, and enables our sales teams to show up in their conversations differently. So this consciousness process for leaders is an incredibly high leverage process, um, and ultimately has a great deal to do with the way that teams function.
I agree. Do you find that most of the CEOs that come in to work with you are acknowledge that from the get-go?
Um, Intellectually, yes, most of them. Um, Sometimes their eyes will widen, and that's a thing, but intellectually, like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I think we're to that point. But it's an entirely different thing to see it in action. Um, there was a moment recently, where I was working with a client, and um, we were talking about indirect communication in an organization, and this person was upset that some of his people were, um, uh, just spreading drama, and one guy didn't get along with the next guy, and they were like coming to him to mediate all this stuff, and it was just really, really challenging for him. And it got to the point where, like, should I fire one of these people because this is just not working? Just a really big, really expensive decision, especially at the levels that these people were working at. And in the conversation, I just was asking questions around, well, how do you handle that? When they come to you, and how long have you noticed this? And what's the first time that this person came to you, and how did you deal with that? And I remember he said, well, I mean, I told her that, I think she's being this way, and it's not just me that thinks that, because I talked to some other people too, and they also think that. So like, she really needs to shape up. And I was like, let's just pause for a second. It's like, what was that what just happened? And I repeated it back, and um, it's like, oh, that sounds a lot like gossip. Oh shit. So I think it's one thing to intellectually understand this process. It's a whole different thing to see yourself do it. And I
Yeah.
think that's what opens up the opportunity of making a shift. And the work to shift, it can be as simple as don't do that thing, but it can also be something that's much more ingrained, like a relationship with yourself, and that can take some work.
Yeah, it is work and it can be painful.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other side of it, it's more freedom, uh, more awareness, which means, in my opinion, better solutions, more agency.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it kind of speaks to this interesting interplay that I know you tie together really well with your coaching, is that, spirituality, inner transformation, they can create kind of this concept of emptiness. And emptiness actually, despite what the common connotation is with our society, it actually can be an incredibly effective mechanism to become a better leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be interested to hear your perspective on that.
I mean, I think you said something early on in our conversation that I think was really astute, which is that our natural state is one of open and empty awareness. Um, if you've gone on a psychedelic journey to significant enough depth, you've sort of experienced like what open awareness looks like, where your body and your all of the aspects of your consciousness and everything else are just part of the whole tapestry of everything else. It's all sort of one thing, and this is an open awareness. It's like the Zen saying, "What's the face that you had before you were born?"
The original face.
Yeah. If that is, which I agree with you, if that is our natural state, And there's all these things, I've heard them called samskaras, that are in the way, that are like these little tense spots, these little nuggets, that some experience one time or another has told us we should be careful of. Um, these nuggets, more often than not, are what steer the way that we show up in relationship with people. I didn't experience anger for a long time because I had so much anger at my dad. And there's one of those things like, I don't have a problem with anger. Who wants to be angry? This is ridiculous.
Right.
Um, but then when I finally touched it, I was like, oh man, I have a deep well of this. And I had to do a lot of work around that. But on the tail end of that, I started to realize what my avoidance of anger had cost me, and particularly in the realm of working with conflict, because conflict is sometimes can get pretty tense and can get pretty angry. And I had a reflexive way of dealing with that, which was like soothe people, just like make it okay. Let's like just all calm down and we can all be rational and we can all, um, you know, I'll do whatever we have to do to get us out of this angry spot. And that led to indirect communication and a whole bunch of less than ideal sort of ways of leading teams, just because I wasn't capable of working with anger in a skillful way. So whether it's anger, whether it's this sort of sense of don't fuck up or anything else, there's all these things that are in the way of our best expression of ourselves as a leader, that can make us feel like we have to be a particular way, make us feel like we have to show up in a particular way, or make us feel uncomfortable in interpersonal situations. And I think the concept of emptiness, sort of cleaning the slate of all of those, which is way easier said than done. There's a lot of work involved, as you said. It creates choice in these situations where previously we would have been triggered and often soothing people or often telling everybody not to fuck up and trying to point out all the mistakes they were making. Once we've done the work to be able to be with those sensations, physical sensations as well as emotional and mental stories, we are able to bring our full selves there and bring choice into those situations. And that's really what we can ask for in leadership, is just the ability to choose consciously instead of unconsciously.
It's such an important point. And I think one of the things that's really fascinating is like the idea of free will, or if you talk to a lot of people, they probably think they are responding with free will, with agency, but it's within that tight little box of the perceptual layer. And so like, it's not actually free will. Like I think of like the example, I needed an example of my book that I've been writing, and I know you've been writing one too.
So excited for that, by the way, when that thing comes out. I'm excited.
Thanks, man. Me too. The example I gave is like someone that is afraid of public speaking, where they're afraid of public speaking. And so they get an opportunity to public speak, and they're deciding what to do with this anxiety, with this like sweating intenseness, and it never occurred. And so they either decide to push through the speaking or they decide to back away from it. And it never occurs to that person that there actually is an experience that is free of all of that. You know what I mean? It's like a constrained agency. And it's really hard. I find it quite difficult to communicate that idea to people that don't have the lived experience through doing the consciousness work. But man, like once you see what's going on, it is just like, whoa, I have been in an invisible box and I didn't even know it.
Yeah. Well, in the case of public speaking, like when you're talking right now, or one-on-one with a friend, you don't have that same sort of tenseness, right? So
right.
What is it about this particular situation? Like, let's look at that tenseness. What is it that gets triggered there? Sometimes just by taking a look at this, you can start to see, oh, well, it has something to do with, actually, one of the coolest methodologies for this that I've have found just super useful is IFS, internal
Oh
family
yeah.
systems, which is a methodology, one of many modalities that I use in my practice. And in that case, you're dealing with, your fear of public speaking as a part of you. The actual physical sensation is a part. So you can interact with it as a part or like a sub personality and have a conversation with it. And so you might ask it, what is it about this situation that's making you react this way? Oh, well, it's, there's so many people there. Oh, okay. What is it about having so many people around? There's other places where there's other people around. Oh, well, they might laugh at me. It's like, oh, isn't that interesting? Has there been a situation where you've been laughed at before? Like, why is that a bad thing? And I'm like, oh yeah, well, there's this one time and da da da. And like pretty quickly, you can you can interact with this part and get down to where this was learned. IFS is a methodology. Neurolinguistic programming uses your eye movements, so you can see like when they ask, "Why are you afraid of public speaking?" Your eyes will alert the answer. It's like whatever you look
Mm.
right away, that's where your mind is storing the answer. And so
Wow,
if you
I didn't
keep
know
your
that.
eyes, yeah, it's a pretty trippy thing when you first get accustomed to it. But if you first you say where did you learn to be scared of public speaking, you go, oh, I don't know, something like that. And if you're paying attention, you'd be like, the first spot's right here. Okay, so just keep your eyes there and just notice what shows up, and you can kind of coach them through the process again of like, you know there might be an image shows up, or maybe nothing shows up, and you got to be creative around like, is it Margaret Thatcher's face? No, it's not Margaret Thatcher's face. Is it a Ferrari? No, it's not a Ferrari. What color is it? I guess it's red. And like you start to kind of unpeel this, and eventually, they'll have this experience that's like, I don't know why, but this jerk in fifth grade is coming up for me right now. Um, and again, it's like there's an initial anchor learning that taught us something. Speaking in front of people is dangerous. Say maybe that was the lesson. And then once we learn that, our mind does a really great job of finding confirming evidence all over the place for why that is the case. And so over a long enough period of time, um, you reinforce that learning over and over and over again until it's just normal. And now I have an issue every time I step in front of people. But through modalities and through some pretty deep intentional work, go back to that initial learning and repattern it in a way that fits, that doesn't have the same charge to it, which I think is another effective way of going about this work.
Yeah, I think it's like you. I think we probably discovered internal family systems around the same time, sometime in the last year. And it's just I feel like it's such a potent way an approachable way to access this stuff, especially for people that don't have like a super big background in meditation. It almost allows you to kind of access that identification and depersonalization of thoughts as the awareness without reaching a depth of meditative experience where you're identified as as the witness or the observer, which is super, super impactful.
Yeah, even in the language that they use, it can be, sort of clumsy at first if you're not used to it, but referring to this thought that I perpetually have as an it or a him or a they, um, depersonalizes it and brings some distance between you and it. And just the function of the language itself is built to create that sort of subject object split, which meditation is enough meditation does a wonderful job of helping you to do that with your entire mind, but you can do that bit by bit as well with just the parts that are in question at any particular time. So yeah, super useful.
What to bring us to a close here, a word that you've written about, which I think ties into a lot of this, and frankly was something that, like you, as a competitive athlete, I just found wholly uninteresting for a lot of my life, is grace. And like for me at least, there was always like a weakness associated with that word. And what role does grace play in this journey, experience, and process that we have described for you?
What a wonderful question. Um, for me, it's central. I think one of the things that I've found is, I think I probably found this initially through meditation, but I see it all over the place now, is that there is a sensation that I'll have, a thought I'll have, a feeling I'll have. There's like the experience of the moment. Maybe I'm angry about something, maybe I'm scared of something, whatever it is. And then there's the meta thought on top of that, or the meta emotion, which is how I feel about the fact that I'm having that emotion. And so I might be scared of something, but then I'm like, well, I shouldn't be scared. I'm kind of mad at myself for being scared, or ashamed that I'm
Right.
scared. Um, those meta emotions, very evident if you look for them, if you notice any sort of strong feeling, and just pay attention to how you feel about that feeling. Most people can pick them up pretty quickly. Um, it's that meta emotion that keeps the initial experience from processing and going through your system and completing itself. So it's, I might be scared, but it's my shame of that fear that causes the whole situation to stick and to become something that stays with me. If I do that enough times, before long, I have to kind of dodge that part of my awareness because it's too sensitive. But if I can notice the meta emotion, if it's anger, if it's anything else, the key, in my experience, to shifting that is grace. It's a unconditional willingness to allow yourself to have an experience, with whatever that experience is, even if it's a shameful experience. I think that's one that I've had trouble with. Right? It's like, if you have um, if you have a thought or an experience of like, I'm better than somebody, immediately when I even say that, I have the meta thought. It's like, oh, that's shitty. You don't say that about somebody, right? So I'm
Right.
judging myself immediately. But that's the type of thought that people have, and much worse. And I'm sure I have all sorts of thoughts that are um, yucky, we'll say. And in order for that to continue to flow through and eventually dissipate and become, and allow me to have the open awareness that I try to cultivate, I have to give myself grace to have those experiences, to have screwed up when I've screwed up, to want what I want. I have to stop resisting myself, and allow myself to be ordinary in all of
Hmm.
the beautifulness that kind of connotes. So
That's beautiful, man. That's beautiful. I've never heard the kind of meta thought articulation, but it's such an important point, because I feel like even when you go on this consciousness path, like there's this sense of like, oh, I'm a bad spiritualist for, having this greedy thought, or comparing,
yeah,
or whatever it is. And you're like, I'm fucking up. And so like, in your desire to like avoid that, you bypass, and then you don't move beyond that. And
or you stack, like people who are first time meditators, they'll be like, I'm sitting. It's like, is this right? Oh wait, I'm not supposed to think. Oh shit, now I'm judging myself. Oh no, now I'm judging that. Ding, 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 ding. Pretty soon it's
totally.
just one thing on top of the next.
Yeah, man. We've all been there. But dude, this has been awesome. Hopefully the first of many conversations. I know you're up to a lot of cool stuff. So I want to give you the opportunity for people that are listening to just share kind of more
Mm.
about some of the stuff you're working on and where people can follow you.
Yeah, thanks. The easiest place is leadinsideout.io. That's the name of the executive coaching firm that I founded and work with a couple other coaches with. And we have a newsletter that's I publish and I write, once every couple weeks. I have a creative writing degree from way back in the day, so I really enjoy the
Oh,
process
nice.
of
Didn't know
writing.
that.
And
Your
so yeah,
writing is excellent, by the way.
it's a thank you. It's a labor of love for sure. I spend a great deal of time on it. I just enjoy that process. So that's a great way to stay in touch. Is maybe subscribe to that. And then that's also connected with the executive coaching firm, which is, to my knowledge, one of the first, if not the first, executive coaching firm staffed and built entirely by former exited entrepreneurs that have all gone on their own consciousness journeys as well. So it's a pretty unique take on the type of support that a founder needs to sort of hold both, the been there, done that sense of how to build an organization and scale an organization, and all of the stuff that we've talked about today around the psychology of a founder and how that ripples out to their whole organization. So we have three other awesome coaches that work there as well, and work with founders from all stages of the life cycle of a founder.
That's amazing. And for everyone listening, those are all linked in the show notes. So check those out. Highly recommend subscribing to Ryan's Substack. And yeah, I think the kind of spectrum of being able to put on your, successful founder hat to like the inner transformation consciousness hat, that is a super unique offering and something that's highly compelling. So make sure everybody checks that out too.
I think the
But dude,
opportunity is to allow those two spaces to become one space, and to be one person in all of those places.
I agree. I think that's the highest expression. It's also a just an important exemplar I think we need in society. Like I think there is this kind of false narrative that like you can't be go to the depths of spiritual transformation and be a highly effective leader in the world. At least that hasn't been the traditional narrative. And it's very, I love talking to people that are living that are putting that out in the world, that are showing people that, hey, there actually is not a true duality between these things.
Yeah. I have found one of the coolest experiences throughout this whole journey is it has a ripple effect to it. I've found, and that the more I'm willing to sort of step out there and share things that I've been ashamed of, things that make me uncomfortable, the stuff that makes me ordinary, like a non-superhuman, idealized, whatever the hell I wanted to be, but just like a real person. The more other people are willing to do that too, and the stronger my relationships get, the better performance we get out of our organization. I think there's in creating that exemplar that you described, I think one of my mentors used to say, leaders go first. And I think that's the opportunity here, is to go first and watch the ripples.
I love it. Well, I look forward to watching them.
Yeah, likewise. You too.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks. I feel honored to be able to know you and be along for the ride.
Same. This is really fun.
Thanks, man. This was awesome. I appreciate you coming on, and I also appreciate everybody listening. Thank you for spending time with us. And yeah, look forward to future conversations.
Thanks, man.